Hey guys, welcome to Skills. My name is Nate, and let's just get into it. So today we're going to be looking at constructs, and we're going to be looking at rule explanation. Now, our next 3 weeks are going to be pretty busy, so let me give you just an overview of what I'm talking about. This weekend, 922 and 923, we have our constitutional structures assessment problem. That'll probably be most of our focus on this particular weekend. Next weekend, the weekend of the 29th and the 30th, we have an evidence midterm that we have to prepare for, which is that Monday. The weekend of October 6th and October 7th, it's the weekend just before our family law midterm, which is on that Tuesday. And let's not forget, Monday is Columbus Day. So we have an extra day to study for family law. So with our weekends, our next 3 weekends, really going to be dedicated to studying for these midterms. So this weekend, we're going to talk about constitutional structures to try to help you get some tips on rule synthesis and how to best be successful in completing your assessment problem. So let's talk about the assessment problem. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure we're all on the same page with the information. We're in Chapter 1, Federal Judicial Power, and the first subsection was the authority on judicial review. And under that subsection, we learned about judicial review and the doctrine of independent and adequate state grounds. There was subsection B, limits on federal judicial power, and we learned about 3 limits: interpretive limits, congressional limits, and justiciability limits. Within congressional limits, we learned about the exceptions and regulations clause. We've also learned about the separation of powers as a limit to Congress's authority. We also learned about justiciability limits and their subsections: prohibition against advisory opinion, standing, ripeness, mootness, and political question. And within standing, we learned about the distinction between constitutional standing requirements and the prudential standing requirements. So this is a rough outline of the topics that we've learned up to this point in the class. Let's take the topic of justiciability, standing, for instance, and let's see if we can synthesize a rule for constitutional standing based on the information that we have now. Here is a slide from the professor. This is slide 3 from class 4, and it says we are focusing on 5 justiciability doctrines, which we know. The requirement for constitutional standing. And here on slide 9 for class 4, we have injury, causation, and redressability. And on slide 11 from class 4, it explains to us what injury is. An injury, the plaintiff must show an injury in fact, which must be concrete and particularized, distinct and palpable, and actual and imminent. So those are the 3 requirements to having an injury in fact. The injury must also be fairly traceable to the challenged action, causation, and the relief from the injury must likely follow from a favorable decision. That's redressability. So with this information, what we can do is we can just add this to our outline under justiciability limits. So we'll take justiciability limits, look at the standing, separate constitutional standing from prudential standing, and then fill in them with things that we know. We know that constitutional standing has the 3 requirements: injury, causation, and redressability. We know that injury must be concrete and particularized, distinct and palpable, and actual or imminent. And we know the definition of causation: the injury must be fairly traceable to the challenged action. And we understand what redressability is: relief from the injury must be likely to follow from a favorable decision. Now this is from class 4, slide 11. This is where we get this information from, and just added it to our skeleton outline. So now let's talk about rule explanation. So in our 2 classes, rule explanation is different. I like to call the rule explanation the professor's version of different strokes for different folks. Now, IRAC is something you all know. Issue, rule, application, conclusion. This is the foundation of legal analysis, and if you're sitting here listening to this video in a 2L class, then you are certified. You've used IRAC successfully in the 1L year, or you would not be sitting in a 2L classroom. Now, obviously, we all want to use it more effectively to get better grades, but IRAC, I think everyone in this room or everyone listening to this video. But now we have to add to this, and we're going to add the rule explanation. Now, how does rule explanation fit within the overall understanding of how to prepare legal analysis when using IRAC? And that's what this video is going to be about. So first, let's dive into evidence. What does Professor Valentine mean when she says there must be a rule explanation? Well, Professor Valentine says, simply put, it is the policy behind the rule. Let's look at some examples. For relevancy, Federal Rule of Evidence 401, Professor Valentine's rule explanation is as follows. The rationale behind the rule is to keep the jury focused only on relevant evidence so that they do not become confused or the trial is not delayed. That is the rule explanation or the rationale behind the rule. Here is Rule 403 and its rule explanation. The purpose of the rule is to help preserve accurate verdicts, those not made, for example, by juries who are confused or inflamed by the evidence. That is the rule explanation for Rule 403, the purpose of this rule. So, your rule explanation should be using words like the purpose of this rule, the rationale behind this rule. Now, if you're having problems trying to identify the rule explanation, try to identify the consequences of benefit the rule attempts to either discourage or promote. Federal Rule of Evidence, Rule 407, subsequent remedial measures, encourages the repair of conditions that may cause a danger to others. And simply put, that's what rule explanation is in evidence. It is the policy, the rationale, why we have this rule. But now let's go to constructs. What is a rule explanation in constructs? Well, the professor wrote to me, and this is what she said. The rule explanation should provide the key case law facts that the student can then use in the application section to analogize or distinguish in support of a conclusion that the rule's requirement have or have not been met. For example, part of the rule for standing is an injury in fact. So here, to have an injury, it has to be concrete, distinct and palpable, actual and imminent. You have to have an injury to have constitutional standing. So for this, the rule explanation would briefly synthesize from key cases, relevant facts, that would satisfy an injury in fact requirement for standing. So let's look at one of our cases, City of Los Angeles v. Lyons. Remember, the police were allowed to use chokeholds on members of the public. So in Lyons, a black teen was choked by police but could not get an injunction to stop those police practices. And the reason why was because he could not show that he personally would suffer the harm again, nor could he show that anyone else would suffer the harm again. And the court called it purely speculative in denying Mr. Lyons his injunction for lack of standing. So here is our adjusted fact pattern. The police hit a plaintiff with a baton, breaking his leg. Plaintiff seeks injunction to stop police from using batons. So, how are our fake facts like Lyons? Because in Lyons they found that there was no standing. Well, if I'm the plaintiff, I'm saying, hey, my facts are not like Lyons. In Lyons, they were talking about the police making a chokehold. I'm talking about police using batons. There is a difference. Each officer issued a baton for this purpose. And in Lyons, each officer isn't issued a chokehold. They're allowed to use chokeholds, but they're not mandated to do so. Officers are mandated to use batons. And there would be more examples that the plaintiff would use to say, no, we are not like Lyons. We are different than Lyons. But the defendant is going to say, well, not so fast here. This is just like Lyons, because the core piece of Lyons was about the speculation. How does this plaintiff know that someone else is going to get hit by a baton? How does this plaintiff know that they're going to get hit by a baton again? That was the court in Lyons said the same thing about the chokehold. How does this plaintiff know? And this plaintiff has the same issue. But again, you would use the facts in Lyons to either analogize your facts or the facts in the hypothetical to the facts in the case and use that to support whatever conclusion you've come to. Our fake facts can survive because there is an injury, or our fake facts cannot survive because, like the court said before, it is purely speculative. And that assessment based on the precedent is the rule explanation that the professor seemed to be looking for. For evidence, remember, rule explanation is policy, and you're looking for things like the purpose of the rule, the rationale behind the rule. Simple, sweet, and to the point. In constructs, rule explanation deals with precedent. How are these facts like the precedent? Are these facts analogous to the precedent, or can we distinguish? If they're like the precedent, then the outcome should be the same. If we can distinguish, then the outcome should be different. Next week's skill session is going to deal specifically with evidence, and we're going to go into the rules a little bit just to see how these rules are. I've also put up a couple of videos online just for some other places. I call them, instead of horn books, horn videos, and they just illustrate the rules in different ways, but they're still saying the same thing. So listen, I want to thank you guys again for listening to this video, and next week we'll be talking about evidence, because evidence midterm will be that following weekend. If you guys have any questions, I am available through email, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thanks again for watching.